24 Grand Slam triumphs for Novak Djokovic, and in the middle of a press conference, a tennis player stopped breathing and uttered her name. Neither Alcaraz nor Alexandra Eala are sinners. Furthermore, the entire nation of the Philippines went mad when he uttered those 3 words. But nobody is telling you this. This was more than just a compliment. A 20-year-old girl from Quezon City recently redefined what it means to be important in this sport, and it was a coronation, a passing of the torch, and an announcement from the tennis player with the most awards in history. By the time this story is over, you won't only understand what Djokovic said, but you'll also understand why it will follow Alexandra Eala for the rest of her career, so stay tuned. Melbourne, Australia, January 2026. Australia's first Grand Slam of the year is already electrifying. Every day, more than 100,000 spectators pour through the gates, shattering all previous attendance records for the competition. The courts continue to function. It's a comfortable temperature. A 20-year-old Filipino woman is also preparing for a significant milestone in her early career deep within Melbourne Park. Her name is Alexandra Eala. She is referred to as Alex by everyone. Ranked 49th globally. She arrived in Melbourne with something that no ranking system could reasonably quantify, having trained at the esteemed Rafael Nadal, Spain's Morca Academy. She led a country of over 100 million people into a singles Grand Slam draw that had never before sent a woman for the entire Open period. Think about it. The first Filipina in recorded history. She didn't inadvertently stumble into this predicament. At the Miami Open in 2025, he made a significant breakthrough. Iga Swiatek, who was ranked 6th in the world, was destroyed by her. Southeast Asia experienced a fundamental emotion when Iga Swiatek, the Grand Slam champion, won the semifinals. After persevering through the qualifying procedure, she went on to a final in Eastbourne in June. She then made history by becoming the first Filipino to win an Open Grand Slam main draw match period at the 2025 U.S. Open. Like kindling, each success stacked on top of the previous one. Her pre-tournament news conference had already earned 175,000 views on the official Australian Open channel on YouTube by the time she got to Melbourne. The equivalent clip for Swiatek is 8,028,000 Carlos Alcaraz, and Ariana is the best in the world. Before hitting a single ball, Isa had lapped the field. She was no longer just a tennis player. She was amazing. Furthermore, Melbourne's Filipino community, possibly the most intimate, passionate, and sports-obsessed diaspora on Earth, was ready. Voices prepped, chants practiced, signals pressed. They had not suddenly materialized. They had descended. Alex Eala's suitability for the Australian Open was not the question. The question was whether the Australian Open had the resources to handle Alex Eala's warning. It wasn't still there. It wasn't just tennis that was ruined on the court as a result of what happened. 6. Being courteous ruined the internet. At this point, the story takes a surprising turn. Alexandra Eala made her competition tennis debut at the Australian Open on Court 6, which is compact, comfortable, practical, and more than adequate for the majority of first-round encounters between 2 players who weren't in the top 50. This wasn't the most initial set of contacts, though. The line that is forming outside the court 6 hours before to the start of the match extends not only down the path but all the way back to Rota Labour Arena, Australia's most prestigious tennis arena. Dawn, supporters had arrived. Families with little children, elderly individuals, and women wearing Ayala shirts with handmade Tagalog signs are all covered in Philippine flags. They perspired all over their clothes as they waited to punish the Melbourne heat, refusing to give up their put-yourself-in-line mentality. Additionally, hundreds of individuals were never able to enter. Simply put, there was no capacity. Gates are closed and the area locked. Outside, supporters rushed to observe, crowding up against barriers and craning toward massive displays positioned all over the property. Because no one had a schedule or a clipboard spreadsheet to determine how many people might arrive, Filipino spectators saw their heroes enter through a pixelated feed while standing at a temperature of 30 degrees. Tennis journalist Jose Morgado didn't sugarcoat it. On social media, he blurted out 4 words that quickly went viral. It is just foolish to place Eala in Court 6. The sensation erupted everywhere. But inside the court, inside that packed, sold-out flag, the atmosphere in the wet arena was better than anything a Melbourne Park has seen in years. There was not a single empty seat. Sitting at the bar next to the court, supporters pressed up against the baseline ledge and had a glimpse of the standing room's piled-up sideline pockets, which were theoretically non-existent. Philippine flags are floating in all directions. "Let's go, Alex," chanting inside waves that were consistent and uninterrupted. They intensified. The game then started. And everything seems to be predestined for one extraordinary beginning. In a 20-point first game, Eala immediately broke Parks. Parks gave up consecutive smashes 20 years earlier. Bali's Eala's clinical and dominating, gaining a 300-point lead by scoring 8 of the next 9 points. The chanting evolved into anything from a group pulse to a stadium den. She completed the initial set of 6. The 99th opponent in the world who failed to perform beneath the sound wall received a bagel. The 6th court erupted. The celebrations weren't just boisterous. It was an earthquake. People heard it outside the gates. In the middle of the rally, players on adjacent courts halted. The boom moved across Melbourne Park like a shock wave, announcing itself without any ambiguity at all. There are important things happening on that court. The umpire, Julia Ignichenko, demanded harmony. Not once, not twice, but multiple cries that were muffled by the den before it fully landed. After 20 minutes, Alicia made a change. Parks made a decision that may break the hearts of 10,000 Filipinos and spark a controversy that would last longer than the actual game. Alicia Parks was sitting courtside after dropping the first set of the switchover without winning a single match. She had 12 aces in her serve. She had a plan that she hadn't implemented, and her admirers couldn't match the quiet she had created for herself. It went that way since I was primarily focused on the Parks' subsequent acknowledgement of the audience for the initial set. It was a success. Something shifted slightly as the second set began. Instead of taking punishment on her backhand, Parks started weaving her first serves, finding corners, and moving yallies side to side. She gained a 3-0 edge by breaking early. Parks won the final by remaining composed despite the audience's growing noise and desire to even the score at 3-3. Served out the set in 3 games, 6-3. One set was now apiece. The third group's competition changed completely. Parks was in command. It was evident that Eala, who had used a great deal of emotional and physical energy creating that perfect first set, had faded. Parks won 62 to complete a stunning comeback after making the changeover with devastating effectiveness. 0-6-6-3-6-2. Eala. There were 2 match points saved. They weren't enough. After being the most boisterous tennis-collecting attendees of the competition, the crowd at Court 6 collapsed into stunned, wounded stillness. Not distressed, not furious, and not broken. The silence that follows the sudden collapse of something beautiful, leaving only the question of what could have been. But for about 4 seconds, there was quiet on the internet. At the same moment, a conversation started in the manor. Tennis traditionalists observed that Filipino supporters cheered during rallies. Actions that violate the unwritten code governing Grand Slam crowds fall between Parks' double faults. That the umpire's repeated warnings had been mostly ignored. Parks mentioned how difficult it is to perform in front of a crowd that is so intense that it acts more like a 12th participant than a spectator. With startling rapidity, 2 groups appeared. Tennis purists claimed that the atmosphere had disregarded Parks and sporting customs in order to promote fair competition. Filipino supporters struck back. The joy was genuine, overwhelming, and uncontrollable when these viewers watched the Grand Slam for the first time in remembrance of their first-ever participation in this draw. Was it fair to subject first-generation tennis fans to standards that needed decades of Grand Slam participation from other counts? For a full 72 hours, the debate dominated social media. Meanwhile, Alicia Parks had just made his way on the internet after navigating one of the most challenging situations of her entire career. After 2 hours of nervous anticipation that she would fail, the audience offered her genuine ovation. She smiled as she acknowledged it, and Eala continued to appear in court despite the loss, her fatigue, and the constant cameras. All of the signatures were signed by her. She said, "It was very heartwarming. That's one of the reasons that makes a loss like today a little more challenging. I am aware of the folks who supported me." But 4 days after the last person who was expected to share their thoughts, there had not yet been an earthquake. By Thursday's entrance at the 2026 Australian Open, the Eala story had expanded beyond sports coverage. International merchants who typically disregarded the features of women's tennis. The Philippine media had essentially become 24-hour Eala programming. The fans of the locked-out issue are the planning court 6. In ways that its communications staff had not anticipated, the chaos of overflow had brought tennis to the public's attention in Australia, and a frank response on social media. The corporation acknowledged the situation and pledged to expand its Eala appearances to larger venues. An unspoken admission that the decision was the wrong one. But rather than decreasing, the narrative and demand for this on the internet kept expanding. For every voice defending the ardent Filipino followers, the issue of manners refused to crumble. Another argued that there are rules in tennis. Regardless of the nationality of the supporters occupying those seats, there are completely unwritten rules about silence during games. Unexpectedly, the argument made deep cuts. Disclosing disagreements over who has the right to define tennis culture, who is traditionally serviced by the game's players, and whether growing your audience entails obligations to newcomers or demands quick adherence to established standards. Parks was cautious in numerous interviews. The atmosphere was difficult for her. She wasn't annoyed. She kept telling herself to stay in the zone. When she stopped battling, she noticed that the audience's enthusiasm had greatly increased. Reactions from a player who would have readily relied on being a victim were incredibly honest. Eala was controlling her own emotional processes in the meantime. She thanked reporters and said, "I'm still learning how to handle all of this attention at 20 years old." For a 20-year-old, her consideration of the historical significance of her presence was astoundingly precise. "There are definitely pleasant things to remember because I am the only Filipina in the draw this year and, I believe, the only Filipina in the draw ever." Her pre-event press conference video has received over 175,000 views and is still growing. The gap between Eala's online presence and the world's top players wasn't getting smaller, but it was growing every hour. Something was emerging that wasn't just a popular narrative but also something permanent. Additionally, somewhere in Melbourne Park, a legendary 38-year-old Serbian who has won this particular competition 10 times 24 Grand Slam championships, the player who has won the most awards in the history of men's tennis that I have witnessed. He had strong opinions. "I'm going to share them," he said. According to Novak Djokovic, they supported more than only Alexandra Eala. It told everyone that she had arrived in the tennis world and left the crowd utterly startled. Thursday, January 23, 2026, following a victory over Francesco in the second round, Djokovic entered his press conference. Is the standard operating procedure for Mistelli? Questions are positioned and queued by journalists and recorders. The subjects were predictable in the beginning. His adversary, his level of fitness, and his pursuit of an unprecedented 25th Grand Slam triumph. Then the crowding problem came up. Tennis matches in terms of the queues, the chaos, and the logistical strain on Melbourne Park as a record of attendance was broken daily over whether or not there was a problem with people showing up.